complete the deorbit burn. Those are inhibited now, I should say, meaning that it was safe to latch the nose cone shut. And the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. This will help keep Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna cool and comfortable during re-entry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes. At this point, like we saw, the nose cone is closing, protecting the forward hatch for reentry. So Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna are using their screens to continue monitoring the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
That's exactly right. Now we have a live view there of Mission Control Hawthorne, actually located just to the side of Leah and I. That is where the calls are coming from that we hear to the crew, coming from SpaceX core Mike Blasco. Another view there of that nose cone closing. There's about another minute and 14 seconds remaining in the nose cone close. But yeah, those calls that we hear to the crew and basically communicating status of what's happening or what has completed, that comes from that room that you see there on your screen.
We're standing by for the confirmation of nose cone closure. We are now about 18 hours since undock yesterday. So we've mentioned that the crew has had time to rest, relax, maybe eat a little bit, take a nap. But right now are monitoring the continuation of nose cone closure, just waiting on that call out to the crew.
About 30 seconds remaining now to nose cone close. As we said before, since we won't be using the 4 forward Draco thrusters, and obviously the hatch is sealed and shut, we are able to close that nose cone. It's an important step because ultimately this is the, now that the trunk has been separated, this is the last major physical change that Dragon will undergo prior to deorbit burn.
Dragon that the CREW-5 crew members are flying on today is named Endurance. It was dubbed that by the CREW-3 crew in honor of the endurance shown by the NASA and SpaceX teams as they were building and training, or building the spacecraft and training the crew through the pandemic. So I thought that was a really nice way to honor both the teams.
Very fitting for sure. So we're standing by for the call out to confirm that the nose cone has been closed. Again, this is the last major physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to that deorbit burn, or excuse me, prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. They've already completed the deorbit burn itself.
Yes.
So this nose cone closure is an important, one of the last steps prior to that re-entry.
That deorbit burn really commits us to returning to Earth. There's not really any waving off after that happens.
And as we mentioned before, we are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Tampa, Florida.
And a look here at both teams monitoring the mission. Over on the left is Mission Control in Hawthorne, and on the right is Mission Control at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Home sweet home. They were in joint operations while Dragon was docked to the International Space Station and until the spacecraft exited the approach ellipsoid. So now the teams are continuing to watch the re-entry of the spacecraft and prepare to welcome the astronauts home, but in a monitoring mode now, since we are obviously quite a ways away from the International Space Station itself. And as for the crew on the International Space Station, they are in a sleep period right now, but they do have the opportunity to watch these broadcasts and watch their friends arrive back on Earth. So hopefully if they're watching, they still take some time to get a little shut-eye later tonight.
So at this point in time, the nose cone is closed. We're just waiting for that to be called out to the crew. From the SpaceX core, next up will be to initiate that nitrox suit purge. Again, that just helps to keep the crew super comfortable during that re-entry period.
And then coming up a little bit later tonight, around 5:50 p.m. Pacific time, that's when the entry of the spacecraft will begin. And during that time, we anticipate to lose communication with the spacecraft as plasma is building up around it. It is traveling through the atmosphere. Eventually, we will regain that signal and communication with the crew members. But of course, Dragon knows exactly what it's doing that entire way home. They are just monitoring and getting closer and closer to splashdown. Again, targeting splashdown for 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:02 p.m. Pacific, off the coast of Tampa, Florida. Nose cone closure continues. It looks like the first set of hooks is closed and the second set is closing as we speak. For our 4 crew members on CREW-5, for 3 of them, this was their first space flight. So Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina are all coming home with 157 days in space. As we mentioned earlier, Koichi Wakata this is his 5th space flight. So he is coming home with a total of 505 days in space.
And in following along with the procedures that the crew are stepping through.
Nose cone secured for entry.
Dragon copy.
And there is that confirmation of nose cone closure that we were standing by for. Now, as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject that cooled nitrox or nitrogen-oxygen mixture into the air being delivered to the suits worn by Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna. Again, that's what will allow the crew to remain super comfortable while the external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little warm on the outside. That heat shield is pointing forward, leading the capsule to the landing site. And speaking of the heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. The first generation PICA was actually first developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
Yeah, so SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA-X, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 commercial resupply missions that successfully resupplied the station on on 20 missions. PICA 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo spacecraft with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down the cost and mass.
The remainder of Dragon capsule is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection, which is lighter weight versus PICA and protects the underlying composite structure during that reentry to ensure that the structural capabilities are maintained.
So while Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit during peak re-entry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection systems, also referred to as TPS, coupled with the environmental cooling and life support system, which we refer to as ECLIS, that's in the pressurized interior, that will ensure that Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna stay cool and comfortable during all phases of re-entry through splashdown.
After Crew Dragon Endurance has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. The first will be 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes to guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in April last year. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
The vehicle velocity at the drogue deploy parachute timing is about 350 miles per hour. So they deployed about 18,000 feet. Now the vehicle velocity when the main parachutes deploy is at approximately 119 miles per hour. They'll deploy at about 6,500 feet. And when we have our water splashdown, the spacecraft is traveling a cool and comfortable approximately 16 miles per hour. So the highest G load we expect the crew to experience during reentry is about 3 to 5 Gs. So again, with nose cone closure, we don't have a whole lot of visual changes, like you mentioned, that we will see. And our crew members are already in their suits and in their seats, as we had a preview of earlier. So coming up next will be our anticipated loss of signal around 5:48 p.m. Pacific time. The crew just got an update on that from CORE here in Hawthorne before we started the broadcast. So again, when we're in that entry period and plasma is building up around the spacecraft, it makes it hard for us to communicate back and forth. So during that time, we won't have communication with the astronauts or the spacecraft itself. However, again, Dragon is fully autonomous and continues guiding those crew members to our splashdown site in Tampa.
That's right. That expected loss of signal, or LOS, as you'll hear it called out, is coming up in 14 minutes on the dot, actually. And it's something that happens every time one of the Crew Dragon capsules returns to Earth. It lasts only a few minutes, but it's something that we will hopefully at that time be able to have some views of Dragon as it is re-entering the atmosphere. But of course, after that, that entry point, like we mentioned before, those parachutes will deploy shortly thereafter, starting with those 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the main parachutes, which are those beautiful orange and white big parachutes that we just love to see during that re-entry.
And of course, the recovery ship tonight that will be recovering the crew from the waters off the coast of Tampa is Shannon, named in honor of Shannon Walker, who flew on the CREW-1 mission back in 2020. Can't believe it's been 3.5 years now.
So at this point in time, as we mentioned before, we are a few minutes away from the next major milestones, about 12 minutes and 45 seconds from that anticipated LOS. We are taking your social questions from social media. If you have one, be sure to use the hashtag #AskNASA, and we'll try to get to them as we can. Sometimes, especially after splashdown, there's some waiting periods. So we'd love to take some questions. We have a couple already, so let's check out what that first one is. This one comes to us from Anchari. At what number is the space station at capacity? Are there interactions between the crew from different countries? That's a great question. I think the fact that it's called the International Space Station is definitely indicative of those interactions that take place among the crew while they are on station. I personally love seeing photos of the crew whenever they're sharing meals together. If they can, I've seen photos where they like to bring up food from that is representative of their country or their culture and share it with the other crew members on board. It's just something I love seeing the crew do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, different cultures have different holidays as well. So sometimes they share those sorts of traditions. And it's definitely the International Space Station. Sometimes they work together on projects or even on spacewalks. Our JAXA astronaut, Koichi Wakata, went out on, I believe, 2 spacewalks with Nicole Mann, our NASA astronaut, during their stay at the International Space Station. So a lot of working together while they are on board. And of course, there's a lot of work going on the ground between our partner countries as we prepare for these missions. And the question also was a limit to the number of people on the International Space Station. So for the past week, we had 11 people on the space station.
Sounds cozy.
It does. It sounds a little cozy, but the space station is also pretty big. And twice it has housed 13 people. So I don't know that there is a max limit that we have established or determined at this time, but we've seen 13 a couple of times before, and we just wrapped up a full house of 11.
Let's take a look at another one coming to us from Jiu-Jitsu Panda. I love that. Can the astronauts work out or exercise on the space station? Thank you ahead of time. Absolutely. In fact, they have to, right?
Yes.
It's required in order to maintain their health, maintain their bone density, which ultimately, keeps them working efficiently while they are on station. But it's also part of the study of how microgravity impacts the human body in terms of, hey, if you do this exercise, what is the result? Are you still maintaining the level of health necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a few different exercise machines on the space station. So I was talking with Shiva. There's a treadmill that you have to kind of wear a belt, and it's hooked to the treadmill itself, so that as you're running, you're not kind of floating off with every step you take. There's also a stationary bike, and then there's also the advanced resistive exercise device. We call it ARED. It can be modified so that you can use it to do arm workouts, leg workouts, anything from bicep curls to squats, even ab workouts. So they've done a great job at providing options up there, and the crew members are assigned to each one. So they don't get to choose a favorite and only get on the treadmill every day. They have to make sure that they're also maintaining their muscle mass and their bone density with a little bit of weightlifting as well.
One thing that I never took into consideration until I heard it called out during the Crew-6 docking period was basically the Capcom at Mission Control in Houston, I think, was talking to Josh Cassada. I can't quite remember, but it was speaking to one of the astronauts on station and basically told them, hey, you can't do your workout as scheduled because we're about to dock Crew-6, and just the vibrations created from the exercise in the space station, even though it is a really big floating laboratory, it's not floating, orbiting, it was, I never really thought that it had that much of an impact to other things until we heard that call out during that docking where we were right about to dock, and it was basically like, hey, hold off on your scheduled exercise for right now.
Right. We heard that yesterday as well before undock. So just want to mitigate any of those things that might impart loads on the International Space Station when you're in a dynamic event like a docking or an undocking. But of course, they do try and schedule their workouts around those times.
Yeah. Let's take a look at another question. We have a couple minutes here, about 7.5 minutes until that loss of signal.
SpaceX Dragon, all crew, satchels are secure, restraints tightened, the visors are down.
Dragon, we copy. Visors are down, restraints are tight, and tablets and satchels and loose items are secured.
All right, good call out there, just indicating that the crew has everything in place, locked away, make sure nothing can escape its secure location during the re-entry portion, and the visors are down. So basically the crew is locked and loaded, ready to come home. Taking a look at this question coming to us from Taniko wow, this is tough. Tiniko Tikza Baloy, I apologize for not pronouncing that correctly. When the Dragon approaches Earth, how do you make sure that it does not collide with airplanes in flight? That's a great question. So part of the process to launch a spacecraft or bring it home is basically to get a license from the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, and basically request that airspace and sea space be quarantined off in a keep-out zone, basically, so that aircraft and sea vessels are not in danger during this phase. So yeah, it's a great question, because you really have to think of, because the Earth is a sphere, it's a globe, it is a three-dimensional process to re-enter the atmosphere. It's not just coming back down to Earth. It is that three-dimensional space, that airspace that has to be cleared and saved, basically. Great question.
That is a good question. And I've seen some pretty amazing pictures before of people in commercial airplanes as they are en route somewhere and can see one of the spacecrafts lift off. So I would love to have that opportunity someday.
Same. Although with how often we're launching out of Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, it's certainly more likely now than it ever has been to catch a rocket launch from your window seat while flying into Orlando Airport. Another question coming to us, this one from Joshua Green. How do the departing astronauts make sure they don't accidentally leave any of their stuff on the International Space Station? And has anyone forgotten anything up there?
Well, there are checklists to make sure that the astronauts don't leave anything on the space station. And of course, I'm sure something has been left behind at some point, but there's always somebody going up and coming back down, so maybe one of their friends is kind enough to bring it back for them. The crew members themselves have a very limited amount of space of what they can choose to take up. I've heard it referred to as maybe like a shoebox size, so they might take up photos or jewelry or special mementos for their friends or family back home. So those things I'm sure they keep close personal track of, but then additionally there is a lot of cargo or scientific research that is loaded back onto Dragon before it comes home. So there are teams specifically dedicated to tracking the locations of items on the International Space Station and make sure that our crew members load them up before it's time to come home.
That's a good question.
That is.
Next one coming to us from Sooner Source. My son Dex would like to know how fast the capsule is going when it hits the water. Oh, that's actually a really great question. I'll back up first. When the capsule is on station and when it departs the space station, it's going 17,500 miles per hour or thereabout.
Yes.
It's going really, really fast. And then we do that deorbit burn, which helps to slow the vehicle down significantly. But at that point in time, it's still going, I want to say it's about 500 miles per hour as it re-enters the atmosphere. That heat shield that we talked about before is actually going to do a lot of work that gets converted into the form of heat, that plasma that builds up, and actually slows it down. So the Earth's atmosphere is actually going to help us out in slowing the vehicle down even further as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. And then we have those two sets of parachutes. Oh.
Dragon, SpaceX for entry briefing.
Go for Dragon.
Okay, just to give you a quick update here for timeline, we are tracking no deltas in terms of vehicle status. Only item to note is that you may get the AGPS alerts when you come back out of blackout. Just wanted to give you an update that if those have the SDC at the end of it, there's no concern. It has no impact on Dragon's automated chute deployment sequence. How copy?
Okay, copy. We may get the APGS alerts if it's got Sierra Delta Charlie. That's no impact.
Those are good words. Other than that, the weather's still looking good, and we're looking forward to getting you home shortly. Expected blackout time is in approximately 2 minutes or so. We'll see you on the other side at 0156 Zulu.
Copy. See you on the other side.
Wow, we got to that anticipated blackout time pretty quickly. So again, that's coming up at about 5:58 p.m. Pacific time, about 5:48 p.m. Pacific time. And so about 30 seconds from now, we will be out of communication with the astronauts and the Crew Dragon capsule during that time. The Corps mentioned an AGPS potential alert coming up after they require signal. That is the absolute global positioning system. They had a couple of pop-ups earlier, but as you heard the Corps tell the crew, those are not of any concern for them. Additionally, I got a good report for everything on Crew Dragon. Dragon looking good as we head into this entry period. There was one ground item we were monitoring that the Corps discussed with the crew earlier this evening. The WB-57 will not be available due to a technical issue. Of course, this has no impact on the operations. It isn't necessary for return. Everything continues to go very smoothly. The main purpose that we fly the WB-57 is to collect engineering imagery in addition to what we get from the cameras on the boat. So we will have those cameras on the boat, keeping their eyes out to spot our crew members as soon as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere.
That's right. Now, after Crew Dragon Endurance has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. First will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes to guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since it launched. Dragon will automatically deploy those parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
And we were just talking about these speeds. So the velocity at the drogue deploy point, we've slowed down to 350 miles per hour. Those deploy at about 18,000 feet. That is quite different from the 17,500 miles per hour we were just traveling before the deorbit burn.
Yeah.
And then the velocity at the time of main parachute deploy is about 119 miles per hour. Those will deploy at about 6,500 feet. And then that gentle water splashdown, we will be traveling at about 16 miles per hour. So again, that highest G load we think is around 3 to 5 Gs. So they should be pretty comfortable, just monitoring again as all of those parachute deploys are autonomous. Again, we are in that communications blackout period. It's just begun.
That's right. We're expecting that to last about 7 minutes due to the formation of plasma around the spacecraft. During that time, no vehicle telemetry is received by mission control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. As a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself, though. During reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from the orbital velocity of 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature that Dragon will experience upon that reentry, in terms of the exterior temperature, is around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So as we mentioned before, we expect this blackout period to last several minutes. We are basically now in that reentry period, and we anticipate this we anticipate getting that signal back in about 5 minutes from now.
This is moving pretty quickly because we are anticipating those drogue parachutes to deploy at about 5:58 p.m. Pacific time. So really just 7 minutes from now. We're looking at splashdown around 11 minutes from now. So this is a very quick timeline. A lot of things happening in rapid succession as our crew members come home. But again, we've heard good reports so far, and we are awaiting that acquisition of signal in around 4.5 minutes.
Now, one thing that if we were able to get views inside the Dragon capsule, which, like we said before, because of that plasma buildup, we are unable to get those views. But if you were watching earlier in the webcast, you did see those crew displays, those touchscreen panels that the crew was using to monitor the health of the capsule, the state of what was, the state of command for what the Dragon capsule was actually executing. As of right now, they also now have a little map that shows where they are and how much further they have to go for this reentry. They will be able to follow along with the anticipated deployment of those parachutes. One thing that the crew is trained to do is be aware of the surroundings. And of course, when those parachutes deploy, because they are slowing the capsule down, there is a small jolt that occurs during that deployment. And so, and also whenever they splash down, you'll also hear brace for splashdown or brace for impact. That is just the crew being aware and just getting ready, holding on to their seats for those moments where there's a little bit more of a noticeable feel to where they are in their seats.
Right, and I think it's very interesting after watching so many splashdowns, whenever we have main parachute deploy, they don't open to their full ballooned shape right away. They do something called reefing. So they open up quite slowly, or sometimes it appears that way. That way, that jolt is not, it's not exaggerated any more than it has to be. So they open up slowly and slow the spacecraft down, again, to about 16 miles per hour.
Again, we're in the anticipated loss of signal. There's 2 minutes, or about somewhere between 2 and 3.5 minutes remaining. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly when we'll be able to get that signal back, but in about 3 minutes, we will start hearing the core reach out to the crew to see if they can make that connection. Once again, the loss of signal is expected, totally normal, due to that buildup of plasma around the exterior of the capsule.
And we also have our recovery teams already on site, already on Shannon, the SpaceX recovery ship, and that is waiting off the coast of Tampa. Some of those team members arrived by helicopter. We have one of our NASA public affairs officers also on.
And there's our first view of the CREW-5 crew in Dragon Endurance re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
So this is a view from the recovery ship itself of Crew Dragon re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Of course, we still do not have communication with them because you can see that plasma buildup as they are coming through the atmosphere, that heat shield doing all of the work to ablate that heat as it builds up around the capsule. So again, as we mentioned, you see the movements here. That's the ship camera moving and continuing to track the spacecraft during re-entry. We anticipate reacquisition of signal in just a couple of minutes from now. As Kate mentioned, it can vary on when we get that timing. But great to already have a view of our 4 astronauts, or 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut inside as they are headed home. There will also be a couple of sonic booms during that time frame.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
So as I mentioned, the SpaceX core.
SpaceX Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
We have you the same. Good to have you back. Expect automated chute deployment.
Dragon, copy.
You know, it's incredible to know that the voice we're hearing is coming from that gorgeous ball of light.
And all of the other little points of light you see around it, they appear to be streaking on the camera a little bit. Those are stars. Obviously, that beautiful bright light in the middle, that's Crew Dragon Endurance coming home after 157 days in space. We are standing by for drogue parachute deployment. That'll be in about 2 minutes, but we already do have acquisition of signal. That came, again, a little bit earlier than we expected. So
that's right.
It is a little hard to target sometimes.
GPS has converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
Dragon, copy.
Again, that point of light in the center of your screen, that is Dragon Endurance. Another, a different view. This one infrared coming from the recovery ship. As we were mentioning, all of those team members that are ready to recover the astronauts are on the ship. They're in position. It'll take just a little bit for them to move in toward the capsule once it lands, but they all have a very important and distinct role to play, either retrieving the capsule or helping the astronauts egress, and they are all standing by.
At this point in time, Dragon Endurance is about to deploy the drogue parachutes. Those automatically deploy around the 18,000 foot mark, and the capsule's going about 350 miles per hour.
Brace for drogue window.
Dragon, brace.
So just a call out there to let the crew know that they are approaching that window where the drogue parachutes will automatically deploy.
And just prior to the deployment, Dragon automatically safes the propulsion system and then deploys the parachutes to stabilize and help decelerate the spacecraft.
So Like we said, we're getting ready for those drogue parachutes to deploy on Dragon. That occurs automatically when it's about 18,000 feet above the ocean surface. And the capsule is going roughly 350 miles per hour. In that view before, there was a difference in, here we can see, it's no longer quite streaking like it was just moments ago, or minutes ago, I should say. Like I said before, it looks like those drogue deploys are now, yep. We got
visual on 2 healthy drogues.
Dragon copy.
As you can see with that infrared view, we have 2 healthy drogue parachutes on Dragon. There's a view from Dragon looking up at the drogue chutes.
Those will remain attached to the spacecraft until they help deploy the main parachutes, coming up in just a few moments. Again, these views coming to us from the recovery ship, standing by to recover our crew members once they splash down. Looks like we
It looks like we have main parachute deployment there.
Main chute descent rate nominal.
Dragon copies, 1,000 meters.
A beautiful,
Copy, 1,000.
beautiful view there from that recovery vessel of Dragon Endurance with those 4 healthy main parachutes. At this point in time, the capsule's going about 119, or was going about 119 miles per hour when those were deployed, and they also deployed about 6,500 feet. So these main parachutes will help slow the vehicle down even further to about
800 meters.
Copy, 800.
so that we'll hear from the crew about how far they are above the surface of the water. So there we just heard that call out for 800 meters. The capsule is slowing down further and further. By the time that it actually splashes down, it'll only be going about 16 miles per hour.
It's fascinating to think that just minutes ago, really, they were in outer
600 meters.
space
Copy, 600.
and are now just 600 meters above Earth. Again, we are targeting a 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time splashdown, 6:02 p.m. Pacific. So that is the next major milestone for us today. Now that we have 4 healthy main parachutes all deployed, things continue to look good aboard Dragon.
That's right. We're about a little less than a minute and a half away from the crew splashing
meters.
down.
Copy, 400 meters.
Once again, we are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida near Tampa. So this is what we would consider a Gulf landing.
And those strobes of light on your screen, those are spotlights coming from the recovery vessels as they continue to track Dragon Endurance.
200 meters, crew brace for splashdown.
Copy, 200 and braced.
Commander Nicole Mann giving out that call as we are standing by for splashdown off the coast of Tampa, Florida.
There we can see the water surface. Dragon Endurance coming closer and closer. And as you just saw, splashdown of CREW-5.
157 days in space.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. Names have been released.
Copy, Dragon. We concur with splashdown and mains released. Dragon Endurance, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
As you can see on your screen, visual confirmation for splashdown.
Thank you, SpaceX. That was one heck of a ride. We're happy to be home. Looking forward to next time.
Dragon Endurance has returned home, and NASA astronauts Nicole Mann and Josh Cassada, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina are back on Earth after an approximately 19-hour return journey from space. The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and now, as you can see, they're making their way to that splashdown location.
Right, and these teams have been ready and been waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it'll take them around 30 minutes to make their way to Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna inside Dragon. We will be listening for Mission Control Hawthorne to give the go for the safe approach now that we have splashdown. There are several different roles. There is an approach boat that will begin inspections. They want to make sure that there aren't any hypergalls, monomethyl hydrogen, and nitrogen tetroxide still lingering around the spacecraft. That way it is safe for the teams to move in even closer and retrieve it.
Yeah, the crew will basically approach the capsule and they use what's basically a sniffing device, a device that can detect those levels of MMH and NTO. They are toxic to breathe, and so this is a super important step to complete.
SpaceX Dragon, looks like we are in stable 1, although a little tough to...
Copy that, Dragon. We concur and are happy to report that the recovery personnel have also confirmed stable 1.
Awesome, thank you.
So just some communication there back and forth with SpaceX Core Michael Blasco and Capsule Commander Nicole Mann, just to confirm the landing position of the capsule itself. As we can see there on your screen, even better now with that spotlight, the crew, the recovery team is approaching the capsule. They are going to make sure that that monomethyl hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide is not present on the exterior of the vehicle. There could potentially be traces due to the fact that those are the thrusters that Dragon was using while in orbit, and so we want to make sure that there aren't any traces of those fumes, basically, so that the team can get close to the capsule. We will actually see an individual climbing on top of the capsule to secure the harnesses that are necessary, the rigging, to lift the capsule onto the recovery vessel. As I have said before, certainly a job that I would not be fit to do, as it involves, as it requires jumping into what we can see as dark water, and climbing on top of the capsule and securing those harnesses.
Where's your sense of adventure? As we heard the core and the crew communicate, the capsule is in stable 1. That means it's in an upright position in the water. Makes it easier to recover, obviously. That is the ideal splashdown position for the capsule itself. So the crew members are still inside. They are still in their suits, in their seats. They will remain that way until the spacecraft itself is lifted onto the recovery vessel. But the first ships arrive are those fast boats. Again, they are just checking out the spacecraft, making sure that it's safe for the rest of the team to approach.
So for those of you that have just recently joined, the CREW-5 team has splashed down off the coast of Tampa, Florida. That occurred just minutes ago, and the recovery teams are now moving into place.
And we're anticipating that those first approach boats will arrive at the capsule just a few minutes from now.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside Dragon in 1 minute.
Dragon copy.
SpaceX Core just giving the crew a heads up. Hey, you might be seeing some people on the outside of the capsule. It's to be expected.
Yeah, first people that they've seen on Earth, in almost 6 months.
That's right, 157 days in space, now complete as Dragon Endurance with the CREW-5 crew, now safely back on Earth.
Again, this was the first flight, so the first re-entry experience as well for 3 of these crew members, Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina. I'm sure that Koichi Wakata, who now has 505 days in space across 5 space flights, told them a lot of what to expect, but it was a new spacecraft for him too. So a lot of new and exciting experiences on today's ride home.
As we said before, the crew generally experiences between 3 to 5 Gs during the re-entry portion of their journey home. So not too bad. Just like a really good roller coaster.
Again, these views coming to us from recovery vessels off the coast of Tampa, Florida, had an on-time splashdown at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And from what we can see, I would say those weather reports were pretty accurate. We had clear skies, able to see the spacecraft coming down under those 4 main parachutes and even the drogue chutes as well. And the seas look pretty calm also.
That's right. So as Leah just said, that splashdown occurred 7 minutes ago. In a few minutes, so there's still more things that has to occur. We can't just pick up the capsule and put them on a boat and bring them out. Very similar to their activities in space. Their activities here for recovery back on Earth are also very highly coordinated and choreographed, really. So we can see that the approach boat has reached the capsule. We should see. Hopefully, it might be tough because of the distance, but we will hopefully be able to see one of the SpaceX recovery team members will actually hop in the water and then pull themselves up onto the capsule to basically secure the harnesses that are required to lift the capsule onto the recovery vessel. As of right now, if we were able to see...
Dragon SpaceX requesting permission to come on board via the display camera view only.
SpaceX Dragon, you are welcome on board.
All right, so just...
We copy.
SpaceX Mission Control, basically just making sure it's okay for us to turn those interior cameras on. So we should get a view, the one that we saw before that sits between pilot Josh Cassada and Commander Nicole Mann, so we can see the screens that they're looking at. But as we were saying, the recovery team is circling the vessel, just making sure that there are no hypergol fumes there that are present. There's also another team circling and gathering the parachutes from the water to try and recover those as well. Once we hear the call out that there are no hypergols present, the recovery team will be able to take off their respirators. So if we were able to see them, they would have personal protective equipment on, those breather masks basically to make sure that they're breathing clean air to ensure that, and they will do that until that they are sure that there are no hypergol fumes present.
Of course, during this time, oh, look, here we are. That's our CREW-5 astronauts now back on Earth. Again, on the left, you can just see the top of her helmet visor. That's Commander Nicole Mann, NASA astronaut. And on the right, NASA's Josh Cassada, the pilot for the mission.
SpaceX is back on board with the display camera only.
Dragon copy.
So that's the inside of that capsule we were seeing sitting in the water just off the coast of Tampa. Also on board, we have, and a thumbs up there from Nicole Mann and Josh Cassada. I imagine probably the same from Koichi Wakata and Anna Kikina, but to their right and left as the mission specialists. And a good look again at those crew displays. Dragon, again, a totally autonomous flight home. They are just able to monitor the next steps. and await for the spacecraft to be picked up by the recovery vessel. So once those ordnance and hypergol checks are complete, it'll take about 18, a little less than 20 minutes for the rigging to be complete. And around the same time, we expect the recovery ship to arrive. And shortly thereafter, they will begin to lift Dragon onto the nest on the recovery ship. They'll pull it toward a platform.
Dragon, SpaceX, hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 25 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC with SpaceX flight surgeon.
Dragon space.
So confirming good ordnance and hypergol checks, meaning they didn't detect any of those fumes that would prevent us from coming closer to the spacecraft, as well as we are anticipating they will have a private medical conference with the SpaceX flight doctors. This is normal routine for astronauts. They have them regularly on the International Space Station. They have them after launch and obviously after splashdown. So just a chance for the crew members to check in with the medical teams.
That's right. So that view there on the right-hand side, there is now an individual who is basically climbing, or will be climbing, on top of the Dragon capsule to secure the harnesses and the rigging that we will use to lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto that recovery vessel. That recovery, the larger recovery vessel, is en route. It is getting closer and closer to the Dragon capsule, so we should have some better views as time continues. But as that call out that we just heard about a minute ago, everything checked out from the hypergol standpoint. None were lingering, and so the recovery team, is okay to take off those respirators that they were using for safety purposes and proceed with the nominal rigging procedures.
Once these crew members arrive on the recovery vessel, Shannon, they will again be placed in the nest. The Endurance spacecraft itself will be placed in the nest and moved to a platform where the astronauts will egress, that side hatch being opened for the first time in 157 days since launch last October.
Might have been a false alarm, false Quindar.
So the astronauts will egress, and as with every space flight that we see, whether they are flying, from here in America on Dragon, or if they are in a Soyuz spacecraft, all astronauts and cosmonauts receive medical checkouts after they land. Again, this is our totally normal procedure. Just an opportunity for them to get checked out. It is quite an environment change coming back from 157 days in microgravity back to 1G here on Earth.
That's absolutely right. But one thing that is for sure of the recovery, of the splashdown and recovery views that we've had whenever we see the crew coming out of the capsule, I've yet to see somebody come out that didn't have a smile on their face.
Oh, how can you not? They just said it was one great ride. So yeah. I'm sure they're all excited, number one, for the experience and the accomplishments that they have, but also now they're back home. They get to spend time with friends and family. They will be helped onto a stretcher, as we've seen before, just to help them get their land legs back.
Yeah, absolutely. It will take about 25 minutes. So we heard, about 2 minutes ago, we heard that it will take about 25 minutes for the entire rigging process to complete and to lift the capsule onto the recovery vessel. We can see there on the right-hand side of the screen that rigging is in process. The left-hand side of your screen, of course, is a view inside Dragon capsule, where the crew is using those touchscreen displays to monitor progress of everything. I imagine they can also hear what's going on outside as well, in terms of the individual that is crawling around on top of the capsule to secure those harnesses.
It's been 15 minutes now since we had splashdown, 9:02 p.m. Eastern time, again off the coast of Tampa. Everything was looking really nice tonight for that on-time splashdown, right on the minute.
That's right. We even had acquisition of signal about a minute earlier than originally anticipated. But as we said before, it's not an exact time that we know it comes back. So we were certainly happy to hear Commander Nicole Mann's voice come through pretty loud and clear.
And of course, these checks and the rigging and lifting Dragon itself take time, and the teams are very deliberate and take the time that they need to make sure that everything is done properly and safely. But I do think it's very impressive and funny to me that within 2 hours you can go from being in space to already back on land on the recovery ship. It's faster than my flight from California to Houston. So I always think that's very fun.
Speaking of timelines, it's also been pretty incredible to see the continuous improvement of the recovery process itself. So thinking back to the Demo 1, Demo 2 missions, where really that process of lifting the capsule out of the water, I forget how long it took the first time we officially did it. I think it was about an hour and a half. And it's really well streamlined at this point in time. You know, this is the fifth operational mission to the International Space Station. Of course, we launched CREW-5, but they're still up there. So this is the fifth one to splash down, and then plus Demo 2 with NASA astronauts Bob and Doug, you know, our favorite space dads. And it's just been really cool to see how, as the SpaceX recovery teams have basically iterated the process a number of times, not only with the actual landings, but with practiced ones as well, with a Dragon capsule mock-up. So it's pretty cool to see how streamlined the operations have been. And there we can actually see our first good view of that SpaceX recovery team member that is climbing on board the Dragon capsule. This is exactly what they have to do in order to place the harnesses and the rigging and secure them. That equipment, of course, is critical to the lifting operation, where we lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and place it onto the recovery vessel. So we'll be able to see this individual move around almost in a spider monkey-like fashion with just such skill, which is incredible when you think about the fact that you know, they had to get in the water first and swim up to the capsule, and so their wetsuit is wet. The parts of the capsule itself are also wet. So it's not an easy job, and they undergo significant amounts of training in order to perform this job not only correctly but safely as well.
And this was a similar role also existed during Apollo. Those were also obviously splashdown missions. Those were called frogmen. And so they would make sure that the capsule was secured before it was brought into the recovery vessel. But speaking of recovery vessel, as we mentioned, we have several team members that are monitoring and assisting with different roles, whether that is to help with medical checks or to bring the crew Dragon back into the ship itself. We also have my colleague, NASA Public Affairs Officer Chelsea Bayarte, who is on the ship, and she is standing by on the phone to give us an update. So Chelsea, tell us what it's like, what the teams are doing right now, and if you were able to see Crew Dragon as it returned to Earth.
Hey, Leah, how do you hear me?
Loud and clear. You sound great.
Oh my gosh. Well, hello. Ahoy from the SS Shannon recovery ship.
Welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. So tell us what the team members are doing right now to prepare to bring Crew Dragon aboard.
Absolutely. So let me walk us back a couple of just minutes ago as the Crew Dragon came down. We went to the tip top of this boat on the helicopter pad to get a view. The boat lights turned completely off. You could see every star in the sky. That's how dark it was. And all of a sudden, you see the brightest shooting star you ever saw in your life pointing down at Earth. And I was amazed how quickly, after those parachutes deployed, the shooting star went away and it just became another dot in the sky among a sea of stars. But this boat had, and several other boats in the area, turned on their spotlights. They had a drone pointed at it. So you always knew where the dragon was, even though to me it just looked like another dot. So they were very quick to locate the spacecraft in the sky as it came down. I had my eyes on Dragon just a minute ago. The boat, the SS Shannon, right now is turning to get into a configuration now that we know that we're safe from hypergulls to go closer to the dragon. See it with your own eyes.
Yes, that's amazing. Just in space moments ago, and now we are getting views from the recovery ship as well. We can see it backing up towards the spacecraft. We also had great views coming from the ships during that descent. So can you tell us what's next for the teams and what's next for you and the other visitors on Shannon? Well, we may have lost communication with Chelsea, but what an experience to be able to be there and see it. I'm very fortunate enough to have shared that experience.
I was going to say, I think I recall whenever you were the person on the phone.
Yes, it was absolutely incredible. She's right. It's like a shooting star. And great to hear, that things have been going well on the ship so far. As she mentioned, we were seeing those it looked like strobe lights almost, but those were the spotlights tracking Crew Dragon as it continued its descent. So yes, they had great coverage of that the entire time.
So we have a great view here of Dragon Endurance there with the CREW-5 crew still in their seats, strapped in, kind of like that part of the roller coaster after it ends. You still have to stay in your chair until the attendants give you the okay and lift the bar that keeps you in. So yeah, we can see that recovery team in the water. If you look closely, you can see some of those harnesses hanging there in front of the side hatch. We can see the recovery team members on Shannon there near the nest, that they're also preparing that landing area. So the part of the ship that arches above where those crew members are standing, that will actually actuate outward, and that will be the part that lifts the Dragon capsule out of the water, and it will basically bring it right over where that nest is, and the Dragon capsule will be set down on that nest, and then that nest will then be pulled forward. So kind of like if you think of yourself, like that nest will be pulled in the direction of you as the viewer, toward the forward end of the boat, and that is of course where the side hatch will be opened and the crew will egress there using that side hatch. Now, when that side hatch is opened, this will be the first time that the crew inside the Dragon capsule has basically breathed earthly air in 157 days. It's the first time that side hatch will have been opened. Of course, the last time it was open was launch day, and that side hatch was closed in preparation for launch. And then while they are on station, they use the forward hatch, or the hatch that is underneath the nose cone there, which is the pointy end of the Dragon capsule. So I always love seeing that hatch reopened because it's a very nice bookend in terms of when that hatch was last closed. That was the day that they went to space, and today's the day that they came home.
Absolutely. And that journey beginning back in October and ending just 25 minutes ago, an on-time splashdown at 9:02 p.m. Eastern. And everything is really moving along with the timeline. Ideally, the recovery ship arrives about 30 minutes after splashdown, and here we are, almost ready to complete that rigging process. You can see that team member still on the capsule itself. They will, again, as you mentioned, lift that and place it in the nest. And the platform that the astronauts egress on is built up a little bit because the side hatch is about halfway up the capsule itself. So they will egress to that, be taken out for some routine medical checks, and eventually they will board a helicopter tonight just within a couple of hours of splashing down that will take them back to Florida before they fly back to Houston. And Anna Kikina will also fly back to Russia.
Yeah. So we're getting to the point in time where, there we can see that lifting arm being moved into the recovery position. Everything's going to move pretty quick at this point in time. The capsule will be in that nest much faster than you think it will be. We can see that recovery team member that was in charge of securing all of the harnesses and the rigging still on the capsule. We should see them jumping off and back into the water in momentarily. That will be a good sign to indicate that all those harnesses are secure and in place. Although I imagine it would be kind of fun to ride Dragon as it gets lifted out of the water, but certainly not safe, so we won't be doing that.
And when they lift Dragon, it's also very stable the entire time. It's not swinging around a lot because there are those different attachment points that make it very, very stable for the crew members coming out of the water and being placed on the recovery ship.
Yeah, of course, the motion of the waves creating a lot of that movement. And there we can see that recovery team member jumping off back into the water. So at this point in time, it's a great sign. We should hear a call out soon, or perhaps just see it first, of the capsule being lifted out of the water. Again, this will happen quite quickly.
Dragon, brace for capsule lift.
And as the capsule is being lifted, there's our first view of that heat shield. Once again, that was the primary decelerator for the Dragon capsule. That's really what helps slow the vehicle down to about 350 miles per hour from 17,500, of course, during that re-entry burn that we saw.
Certainly did its job.
Yeah.
Bringing them to that gentle splashdown with the help of those parachutes, about 16 miles per hour. So they have obviously lifted Dragon. They are placing it in that nest. They'll secure it there and remove some of those attachment points before moving it toward the egress platform.
Now we can see some waters held in what looks like a kind of like a bucketed area there underneath the side hatch. That is the location of where the main parachutes are stored. So all four of those main parachutes are tightly packed and placed in that cubby, basically, and we can see water draining from it now. The location of the drogue parachutes is up near where that harness is secured above the side hatch there at the top.
And it's always interesting for me to see those attachment points because, before seeing these missions or before working at NASA, you would always assume that the parachutes would just come from the top of the spacecraft. So not always the case. Looks like Dragon is getting comfortably seated in the nest. Again, things moving along pretty quickly. A few minutes ahead of the ideal timeline here. Now just 30 minutes since splashdown. And we already have the spacecraft on the recovery vessel. Again, this recovery vessel being named Shannon after Shannon Walker.
Dragon, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks. Stand by for translation to the egress platform.
So at this point in time, the CREW-5 crew members are feeling a different sensation now. So when they splash down, of course, they're greeted with gravity once again, but there was an additional sensation of being in the water, and now that they are on the recovery vessel, it is clearly more secure than that. Or not more secure, a lot less motion than being in the water. Of course, they're still on a boat, so there's a little bit.
Yeah, and after these connection lines are removed, we'll be looking forward to hatch opening. Of course, we have to move the Dragon to that egress platform first, but Dragon will stay in this hatch, or in this nest, I should say, until it returns to port. So while the astronauts will be flown back to Earth, or they're on Earth, but once they're flown back to solid ground tonight, it does take a little bit of a journey for the spacecraft itself to make it back to port, and it's going to remain in that nest the entire time.
So following along with the recovery procedures, we're looking at roughly 5 to 6 minutes until we get that side hatch open. Once again, assuming that all the checkouts, of course, the capsule, the Dragon capsule itself is equalizing the pressure inside to match the pressure outside as well. And ultimately, the crew is just continuing to monitor the progress. They're using those screens in front of them, but they remain comfortable in their seats. We continue to flow that nitrox air through the suits in order to keep them comfortable. Of course, I always like to say that that air is the same stuff that scuba divers use to, in their breathing equipment. So that cooled air is certainly an additional piece of comfort for the crew during this process, because as we said before, right now there's nothing for them to do but patiently wait for the translation of the Dragon capsule into that more forward position, as Leah was talking about, where we will be able to open the side hatch.
And again, obviously, we've got Dragon Endurance on the left and that view on the right coming from inside the spacecraft itself. Our 4 CREW-5 members, as you mentioned, patiently waiting. No action on their part, just continuing to monitor, and as they are now aboard recovery vessel Shannon. Like I said, this is named after Shannon Walker, NASA astronaut who flew on the CREW-1 mission. There's also another SpaceX recovery ship named Megan, after Megan MacArthur, who flew on CREW-2.
So once again, we're standing by for the capsule for that forward translation to the egress platform, which is where we will be able to open Dragon's side hatch and ultimately allow the crew to egress.
And as we've mentioned tonight, the crew will board a helicopter that lands on that helipad where Chelsea was talking about watching splashdown from. They will be transported back to shore tonight. Additionally, along with them, there will be a couple of more helicopters that take off and take some of the additional visiting personnel, including Chelsea, who gave us the report from the boat. And not only people, but they're also taking some time-critical science, some samples from the astronauts themselves. They'll return those extremely quickly to the scientists on Earth.
And there we can see that Dragon Endurance is now making its way to the egress platform with that forward translation of the capsule.
Slow and steady, but this is the last major move for Dragon. After this, we will wait patiently for hatch opening. There you can see that platform I've been discussing. Just behind it is a little hallway. There's some medical checkout rooms for the crew members to get those, as I mentioned, very nominal and very planned medical checkouts now that they're back on Earth.
We were able to see the recovery team hosing the capsule down. We're using fresh water to do that, of course, to help minimize any corrosion to the capsule as we do reuse these. So basically just trying to give it a freshwater bath as it is on the deck. We're also able to see that the recovery team on the platform has their personal respirators or breathers. They are going to do an additional hypergol sweep that is to basically triple check that there are no fumes for the MMH or NTO, that monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. Those are the propellants that are on board the Dragon capsule for its on-orbit propulsion system, and they are not fumes that are you're able to breathe. They're quite toxic to people, so we'll see them perform an additional check.
So once we do open the hatch, the first smiling face that Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna will see will be a SpaceX medical doctor, just to check on them, see if they are ready for egress. We hope to get some views shortly thereafter of our crew members. And here is a great view of the hatch itself. Again, next major milestone will be for hatch open.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned before, while Dragon's top hatch is what is used to connect to the space station, or the forward hatch, the astronauts are going to egress from that hatch right there. That's the side hatch. And before opening the hatch, the spacecraft's cabin pressure is equalized with the outside environment. Then once that side hatch is opened, that will be the crew's first breath of fresh earthly air since boarding Dragon at the start of their mission back in October.
Now, right here, you can see SpaceX crew members. We also have some NASA crew members on the spacecraft itself, or on the recovery ship itself. They are on the spacecraft too. But letting these SpaceX teams take care of preparing Dragon for hatch open. And once that happens, it's important to note again, Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna will be getting that assistance from the recovery teams when they're exiting the capsule. It is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, because returning to a gravity environment can challenge our vestibular system. That's responsible for maintaining our balance and motion. And of course, safety is always the #1 priority with this operation. So you'll see Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna helped out of the capsule, assisted a few feet to the medical quarters aboard the boat. And if you've ever watched crews return on a Soyuz, or even previously with Dragon, this is the same process as when they are carried from the capsule to waiting chairs. And then in the case of a Soyuz, there's a waiting medical tent. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is also the time period where that time-critical cargo can be recovered from the spacecraft, with the remainder waiting until the ship is back in port. But some of those cold stowage items, they're able to get that back to the investigators and the researchers as soon as tonight, so they're able to analyze that. And then once the ship and the capsule return, the recovery team will perform some additional inspections before loading Dragon onto a flatbed truck at the SpaceX facility in Cape Canaveral for post-processing and, of course, potential future reflight.
So we're about 5 or 6 minutes away from crew egress. We can see that the personal protective equipment.
Dragon, stand by for side hatch opening in approximately the next 60 seconds.
We're looking at Rick right now.
So we can see that those, and there it is, side hatch open on Dragon Endurance.
First time since it was closed last October, sending these 4 crew members on their journey to the International Space Station. And in that view on the right, you can see that SpaceX medical doctor getting that first check, making sure everyone is feeling all right back here on planet Earth before we begin helping those crew members out of the capsule.
On the left-hand side of the screen, we can see the recovery team members placing a protective frame around the interior of the hatch. As I mentioned before, of course, we reuse our Dragon capsules, and so really to preserve the integrity of that hatch, which of course is important, we put some protective framing around there to help make sure that there is no damage incurred to the side hatch as the crew members are exiting or egressing from the capsule.
I'm still able to get some notes from Chelsea. She said there's a big round of applause on the recovery vessel now that the hatch is open. A really great moment. Really signifies the end of a successful mission.
So as we mentioned before, that the individual that you see there on the right-hand side of your screen between pilot Josh Cassada and Commander Nicole Mann, that is the SpaceX medical doctor, always the first person to pop in. Basically just looking for 4 thumbs up from the crew members to indicate that they're feeling all right and ready to egress the capsule.
We'll also get a chance for one of the photographers. We do have photographers on the recovery ship as well that are able to document the splashdown itself. So, as I mentioned, going to get that shot. Hopefully 4 smiling faces.
I'm sure they're using a wide angle lens to capture everyone's smiling faces. And the other thing you can note there on the exterior of the Dragon capsule is the evidence of re-entry. You can see there with some slight scorch marks on the thermal protective system there. It was a very pristine white on launch day, and within the last hour, of course, it re-entered the atmosphere and splashed down, and we can see that evidence there on the exterior of the capsule.
Yeah, the heat shield obviously did a great job bringing back our crew members safely. And this is the second flight for this capsule, so there is the opportunity for it to be taken back and refurbished or polished up, prepared for another future flight.
So for those of you just recently joined, the crew is the CREW-5 astronauts and cosmonaut are now on board the recovery vessel, and we are awaiting their egress from Dragon Endurance. They will come out one at a time, assisted by the recovery team members. As you can imagine, after spending 157 days in space, gravity might not feel super awesome right now, and so we will assist them just to make sure that they are safe, making their first motions back on Earth.
You can see them passing out of the capsule. Those are the tablets that we noticed earlier the crew members wear around their upper thigh. They're able to monitor procedures on those tablets. So they're starting to pass those out of the hatch. I think I've seen all 4 come through, and that was a footrest. Those can be detached, obviously, here on Earth or whether on orbit to have a little bit more space in the capsule. So they'll remove those 4 footrests to allow teams to more easily enter Dragon and help these crew members back on board the ship. Again, this view here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, teams at SpaceX monitoring the return and arrival of CREW-5. Coming up on about 45 minutes since splashdown tonight. The side hatch is open. Crew members are being prepared for egress. Everything has moved really smoothly tonight so far.
Once again, that is a view looking toward the side hatch, that view has Commander Nicole Mann on the left-hand side and pilot Josh Cassada on the right-hand side. So they're most likely debriefing the crew members on, what to expect, the next steps for their next steps.
And helping them get out of their seat belts, just making things easier for that egress. We saw those foot restraints, or the foot rests were removed from the spacecraft. So just making things easier for our crew members. As you can see, their visors are up. They are hopefully pretty comfortable in those custom-fitted suits, as well as those seat inserts that are custom-fitted as well. Again, these are SpaceX team members. It helps distinguish due to the different colored flight suits they're wearing. So they're wearing black suits, and typically when you see someone in a royal blue suit, that is a NASA team member. So we saw a couple of those from the other view, but right now this is mainly the SpaceX crew inside Dragon helping the, oh, and there's a few of those NASA team members as we mentioned.
That's a great shot because you can really see that scorching on the thermal protection system, as I was talking about earlier, that evidence of reentry. The exterior of the capsule got up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think it's quite beautiful to see returned capsules, of course, because it's just that evidence of spaceflight.
And success.
Absolutely.
Just a slight toasting. And just a reminder, of course, once these astronauts are helped out of the capsule, we'll see them being placed likely on stretchers, again, helping them regain their Earth legs. They'll then move into those routine medical checks. Those happen on the boat. And shortly after those, they will board a ready and waiting helicopter to head back to land. Once they come back to Florida, there will be a NASA spacecraft waiting for them to bring them back to Houston. They'll be able to reunite with their friends and family. And it looks like our egress is beginning with NASA astronaut Josh Cassada, pilot of Dragon Endurance on CREW-5. His first space flight coming home with 157 days.
I believe there is a almost like a little slide that is secured to the exterior of the capsule and to the egress deck, basically to bridge that gap. Yeah, we could see Josh sliding out of the frame there, and that really just helps them get out of the capsule, not only from the standpoint of making it easier on them, but also preserving the hardware around that, the hardware of the side hatch as well. Of course, all those buttons that we see there on the crew displays are all now completely deactivated now that the Dragon capsule is recovered and secure on the recovery vessel. So even if somebody were to bump one with their elbow or their head, nothing would happen. Those have all been safed.
So Josh Cassada, NASA astronaut, our first crew member out of the spacecraft. Looks like those SpaceX team members are back inside Dragon Endurance, and they are helping. I doubt we'll hear any more of those calls from the crew to the ground now that the hatch is open, but every time I hear it, I pause a little bit.
Yep. If I had to guess, that was probably that recovery team member accidentally bumping the armrest comm panel, which is the comm panel that they use to basically push to talk while they're in their seats. So if I had to guess, that was an accidental bump there. So it looks like the second individual to egress from the Dragon capsule will be Commander Nicole Mann. And there she goes.
Also 157 days for Nicole, being that it was her first space flight.
I would imagine for Koichi, who you mentioned earlier, has, you'll have to refresh my memory, over 500 days now logged in space?
Yes, exactly 505
There we
today.
go.
So
I imagine this part is never easy, but he's very familiar, knows what to expect in terms of the change in mobility now that he's back on Earth.
Commander of CREW-5, Nicole Mann, also became the first Native American woman to live on the International Space Station. So a real moment of pride there, I'm sure. And you can see her being helped to those medical quarters. Again, all nominal, all pre-planned checks. Just an opportunity to make sure the crew is feeling good before they take that helicopter ride back to shore.
Exactly, and as you mentioned earlier, all the crew members are effectively placed on what basically looks like a stretcher, and that's just, again, really to assist them because returning to Earth after, as we said before, 157 days in space can be pretty tough on the body, and of course, in order to keep them safe, we want to assist them. So all four of the crew members are placed on a wheelie bed and rolled back to those medical quarters, as you said, for their evaluations with the flight doctors.
So now our NASA astronauts are out of the spacecraft. We are awaiting egress of Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina, her first space flight, and as we mentioned, seasoned veteran Koichi Wakata of the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. And this looks like it may be Anna.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, that slide, we have a great view of that slide now. Really helps the crew in this egress procedure.
Oh, this is probably Koichi, judging by, I can see that Japanese flag on that team member right there on the right.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it looked like, yeah, that looks like Koichi. It looks like they were pulling from seat 1, so yeah, that would have been Koichi's.
Oh, I can see a
Look
smile
at that
on his
smile.
face. Definitely not his first rodeo. That means our last mission specialist and crew member to egress today will be Anna Kikina. In that far right seat, we can still see one of those SpaceX crew members inside helping her out of the seat restraints. Not even an hour since splashdown, and we are almost having all 4 crew members out of the spacecraft.
That's right. Splashdown occurred off the coast of Tampa, Florida at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. So yeah, we're just shy of an hour.
Again, we had great weather reports as we prepared to splash down at Tampa, and we even got pretty good views of how calm the ocean appeared to be as the crew members awaited the recovery ship to arrive.
And for those that might be wondering, at the top of the capsule there, there was a curved line. That was the line indicating where the nose cone was separated from the primary structure. So it looks like Anna Kikina, our cosmonaut on board CREW-5, is about to make her way down the fun slide and egress Dragon Endurance, which once again made its second splashdown.
Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina, our final crew member to egress tonight. Again, her first space flight. She will also have those same medical checks before flying back to Russia.
Look at that smile as well.
And that is all 4 of our crew members. Now that Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the medical teams, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. Again, this all kicked off on October 5th, 2022, October 5 for CREW-5, from historic launch pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna made a 28-hour flight on board Dragon 2, the International Space Station. Since arriving at the space station, they spent nearly 6 months as members of Expeditions 67 and 68, executing science experiments, spacewalks, and repairs while aboard the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home began about 19 hours ago on March 10th when they closed the forward hatch to the Dragon capsule and undocked from the International Space Station at 11:20 p.m. Pacific time. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for their re-entry. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the deorbit burn, at 5:11 p.m. Pacific time to send the Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 healthy mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Florida at 6:02 p.m. Pacific time. Following that successful splashdown, we saw Spacex recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Endurance for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour ago, 58 minutes to be exact.
Wow.
Following splashdown, we saw Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna make their way out of the Dragon capsule and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
So next up, they will catch that helicopter flight back to shore. They will transfer to aircraft that will take them home. Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna will take a NASA plane for the short flight to Houston, and later Anna will fly back to Russia. They will be reunited with families to bring an end to this mission. Of course, as always, it's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
The return today marks the end of a direct handover that we just executed after successfully launching the CREW-6 mission to the space station just a little over a week, actually, about a week ago. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share this mission with the public. All the teams from SpaceX and NASA continue to work hard to keep America leading the world in human spaceflight. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we will continue to share the progress of Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna on social media as they travel back home. We also have a post-splashdown media telecon coming up at approximately 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, where leadership from NASA, JAXA, and SpaceX will share updates as we conclude this successful mission. So we say thanks one more time for tuning in and cheering on Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna as they made their return back to Earth. So from all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, CREW-5, and we'll see you next time.
Recuerda darle like, suscribirte y activar la campanita, te estaremos muy agradecidos por tan valioso gesto de tu parte.